everyone, and welcome to the meeting of children and young people. Bore da a croeso I cyfarfod plant a pobl ifanc fan hyn yn Trifynnu bore yma ar dydd Llun. Welcome to the meeting and thanks for making the effort to attend because I know this is an extra meeting. I'm Tudor Thomas, I'm Chair of Children and Young People, and obviously I will be chairing the meeting today. So we go now then to the agenda. I've had apologies for absence from Councillor Joe Watkins and from Peter Strong from NUE. No other apologies. Second agenda item, declarations of interest. We'll take as and when. I think a number of us, well, I know a number of us are on governing bodies, and therefore we need to, it's not prejudicial, but we need to state that at the start of that item and before we speak.
Yeah, Chair, could I just say in terms of apologies, Councillor Christopher Edwards is still trying to get into the meeting, but is having technical problems, so hopefully he'll arrive soon. So I'm just saying that in terms of the apologies agenda. Thank you. Okay,
thank you, Councillor Brown. We go now then to agenda item 3. We're going to go to budget monitoring. I know we've got a number of people here today who are going to speak to this, and I've got down Emma Davis, who I think hasn't spoken at CYP before. So obviously, Emma, welcome. Well, we've got Nikki Wellington, who's obviously finance officer in CYP, and Tyrone Stokes. I don't know who's going to kick off. And I think we've got Jonathan Davis as well. I can see in the background. Welcome, Jonathan. Over to you, Tyrone.
Thanks, Chair. I'll start. If I present the meeting, try and draw up some of the more salient points of the report in front of you, and then I'll go into the element of the CYP portfolio that's under my remit, and then I'll hand over to my colleague Nikki Wellington, who will be able to take you through the remainder of CYP, which is predominantly around schools. So good morning. My name is Tyrone Stokes, I'm manager for social care and health, and in terms of this select portfolio, my responsibility is children's services. The report in front of you is the 2020-21 revenue and capital outturn report. If I first of all take you to section 1 and 1.2, and that's just to highlight to you that all of the financial information I'm presented today can be seen in Appendix 6, and I'll take you to that shortly. Next thing I'd like to draw your attention to is Section 2 and Note 2.1, and that's for select to note the net revenue outturn position and the effect on reserves. In terms of reserves, there's been a significant improvement of just over 5 million. And that's been predominantly down to some of those bullet points around the receipt of COVID money and some budgeted Welsh Government grants and underspends across many areas within the council due to the pandemic and impact on services either being stopped or we're having to cut back and reduce. Travel requirements as well, with people predominantly working from home, and that's led to savings within office and building costs due to those remaining closed, staff working from home, and we are carrying staff vacancies as well. 2.3 is another element I'd like to highlight to select, and as part of the budget setting process, we do have mandated savings. They are detailed in Appendix 2. But just to note that 85% of budgeted savings have been achieved. Within children's services, those savings mandates totaled 350,000, and I'll come on to those in more detail as I do my presentation to you this morning. The next thing I'd like to take you to is Section 3 and 3.2. The pressures within children's services relate mainly to continued increase in the number of looked after children. The pay award for staff was finally agreed at 2.75%. However, there was only 1% in the budget, So we had to carry a 1 3/4 additional cost within the budget. 3.4 then gives you a table of the overall revenue outturn position. And for social care, health and safeguarding, there's an overall overspend of 811,000. In terms of children's services, that amounts to just more than 1.3 million. Is 1.353 million is the overspend for children's, and I'll come into that in more detail. 3.8 shows the movement in reserves, and the replenishment of earmarked reserves is just in excess of 4 million, and that's for reasons I've already highlighted further on earlier on in my presentation. 3.9 highlights those budgeted savings, and again the £1 million related to social care, only 350,000 is relevant to children's services. The 300 of that 350,000, 100,000 is due to improvements in legal costs. However, that hasn't been achieved. 250,000 was due to our multi-agency service team, for short is called MIST, and that's where we take high-cost residential placements and try and bring those children that have been placed out the county, out of their own community, and we try and bring them back in county with a more structured care plan that will succeed for the benefits not only of cost to the bottom line, but more importantly to the child and the outcome of the child. And I'm pleased to announce that that 250,000 budgeted savings was achieved in full. If I draw council into Appendix 6 then, which gives the main detail of the revenue outturn and can give you some more explanation around children's services. If I take you to Table 2, it highlights here that children's services had an annual budget of 14.365 million. However, we spent 15.718 million, giving an overspend of 1.353 million. The main reason for the overspend, £1 million, is due to the provision of care and support for our looked after children. We set a balanced budget of 197 looked after children, but after council approved the budget, we had 2 families with 13 siblings come into the looked after system, and the closing number stood at 213. In terms of the capital budget, with children's services, we have no capital budget. So if I can leave questions to the end, I'll be happy to take them at the end, and I'll just pass you over to my colleague, Nikki Wellington, who can take you through the remainder of the CYP agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tyrone. Thanks.
Thank you, Tyrone. Thank you, Chair. My name is Nikki Wellington. I'm the Finance Manager for Children and Young People. So I just want to take you through the portfolio for children and young people this morning. So we start off with the outturn. This is on page 20. So the outturn for children and young people was an overspend of 75,000. That is split between individual schools budgets, which was a saving of 298,000, resources, which was a saving of 14,000, and an overspend on our standards of standards division of 386. The saving on the individual schools budget had decreased slightly since that we reported at month 9, and that was due to the final rates bill for Monmouth Comp. You'll be aware, members will be aware that Monmouth Comp has been open for a number of years, but we were working with the valuation office to get the final rates bill in during the build period and up to present day. So that's all been done now. The resources, there was a small saving there of 14,000, and that's mainly due to vacancies that have been held within that directorate. Standards, as I said, overspent of 386,000. Detailed in the table is the list relating to that. The majority of that is ALN, and that's been reported throughout the year and still does provide pressure for the children and young people's division. The overspends are made up of a combination of additional pupils, so a higher number of pupils going in to specialist provision, but also an increase in the costs of those specialist provisions. Our savings that we were targeted with at the start of the financial year was 648,000, and I'm pleased to report they were all on track and all been achieved. So that's everything in terms of the central budgets. Chair, if you're happy, I'll move on to schools and then take questions afterwards. I think that might be easier.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nick.
Okay, so now we're turning our attention to page 32 in the packs. So this is the schools. You'll be familiar with the table. So we opened the schools balance. Those opened with a deficit of 435,000, and at the end of the year we saw a surplus of 3.4 million, with 2 schools in a deficit, one primary and 1 secondary school in a deficit. The bulk of the swing was due to some grants that came out at the very end of the financial year from Welsh Government. So there were 2 main grants. There was 1.1 million that came in relating to revenue maintenance costs, which schools were allowed to offset against things such as cleaning and caretaking. And then there was another 662,000 that came in relation to raising standards, so catch-up work for schools. Both of those were received at the tail end of March, and both of those have obviously been sitting in school balances to be used for the purposes that they were given. The allocations were prescribed by Welsh Government. The local authority did not change those allocations. They went straight out to schools on those allocations. So currently we're now working with schools, obviously, to anticipate investment plans and to ensure that those grants are spent in the way that the grants terms are listed. So happy now to take any questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Tyrone Stokes, and thank you, Nikki Wellington. Now, any questions or comments now from members, please? If you could put your hands up. Fairly silent there at the moment. One point I would want to make, overall, and I do have a great deal of sympathy in terms of the budget for looked after children, the children in care, and with a significant increase there of 13 children coming in after the budget has been set, and I think that obviously puts a pressure, and it's something that no one really can foresee, and stating the obvious, obviously as an authority we can't say, well, we're not going to care for those children. If that happens within our authority, and then obviously we have a duty of care, and we're honour bound, and we to look after those children. So I think that's a key point. I can see Martin Groker's got his hand up. I don't know if electronic hands are not working well this morning. Councillor Groker, please.
Thanks. Yeah, I've been searching around for the yellow hand. Oh, it's appeared in the chat bar now, but I have your eye anyway. So really, just a couple of comments, and I think I do need to declare a personal non-prejudicial interest as a governor at King Henry VIII, and for much of the period that we're looking at here, I was also a governor at Llantilio Patholdi Church in Wales Primary, but I've now resigned, or they've kicked me off. I'm not sure which it was. It's great to see the Welsh Government actually stepping up to the plate here, and in all sorts of ways helping local authorities to meet the costs of the pandemic, and that has been good to see. Nikki, I think, made the point that grants are very specific and have to be used for the purposes for which they're intended. And I think I heard it hinted that work was going on with schools to make sure that happens. I think it's a point I would emphasize, because much of that money will be specifically to help children, particularly those who are disadvantaged or vulnerable, where the gap has widened even more than it was in the past, pre-pandemic, and schools now have got a tremendous challenge in helping those most vulnerable children to start to get back to start to address their potential. If I could make a wider comment, though, because in the wider county council, comment is often made to Labour members as if we had some direct control over our friends and colleagues in the Bay about the nature of funding of Welsh education. And much of it does seem to be based around grant funding. And if I were still trying to deal personally with budgets of schools, I think I'd find that quite difficult. And I'd like to make the point that it's something that within the Labour group we've discussed, and I think many of us would like to see a greater long-term security in funding in schools. And it is a point that we have made to colleagues at Cardiff Bay, that in the long term, maybe it would be better if more security in the long term were available to our financial planners, rather than having to wait for grants that come out in March and schools told to go and spend the money. I have to say that as a school governor, it has come as such a sense of relief to know that we're not scrabbling around looking for further savings. But being able to plan the use of that money that has come in late on in the financial year is quite difficult, because you want to make sure it's used properly, and in that you weren't necessarily expecting it, or as expecting as much as we got, then it's all a bit of a scrabble around. So yes, I think I'm speaking on behalf of my finance colleagues here in saying I just wish at times the Welsh Government could let us know a bit further in advance where they're going to give us money, because it's lovely to have it, but it would be even better if we could plan it a bit more carefully, I think. Thanks, Chair.
Muted, yes. Sorry. Thank you, Councillor Grocott. Anybody else with any points to make on the budget outturn reports? Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask Nikki about the last page of the report that was referred to, obviously, with regard to the school budgets. I think it was page 32, I think, was it? Yeah, page 32. I think it's the table 2.2. And is very good to see all the budgets have improved, but it does actually seem that some have improved more than others, and I just wondered why that was the case, and if you could explain it, because it seems like in terms of Chepstow, the improvement isn't the same as the other schools, and I think there is some comment somewhere in the report about the need for Chepstow in terms of staffing and so forth. So if you could, through you, Chair, if Nikki wouldn't mind commenting on that. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm happy to pick up on those points and to pick up on Councillor Grocott's points earlier as well. So while the money is very welcome, of course it is welcome, and schools are very pleased with that, and it's a point well made that the planning around how the grants are used, and they are very specific. In terms of the schools, there are schools that still have underlying structural deficits, and that's what we need to be aware of. Is that while the balances are pleasing and have come in, we don't want it to mask the issue that there were a number of schools in a deficit position at the start of the year that had recovery plans, and they should still be implementing those recovery plans if required, well, as required. And I think Chepstow is a good school in a good point, actually. So Chepstow School had already started its journey of recovery at the start of the year. The pandemic unfortunately pushed back a restructure, a well-needed restructure, for a number of reasons. Obviously, we couldn't continue with carrying on with that restructure while the vacancies, etc., that teachers and non-teaching staff could look for during that period of uncertainty. So we were asked to stop the restructure, which is what was done. So that's been delayed a year, and that's really effectively while that school, although it has received a number of grants, it is still in a deficit position because it needs to address that structural underlying deficit.
Okay, thank you, Nikki. Thanks for coming back on that. Any other points from councillors or members of the committee?
Yeah, I have got my hand up.
Yeah, sorry. Right. It's not showing up at the moment. Maureen.
Yeah. Oh, does Louise want to come back?
If I could, I don't quite understand the structural deficit point, because if I could come back, Chair, because obviously, we've got the figures there, which are sort of plain deficits and surpluses, and it looks like all of the schools are in surplus, which is good because of the grants they've received. But I don't understand the, have all the schools got structural deficits, or is it only some, and how does that actually impact, their availability of resources? So you've answered part of the question, but I'm left wondering what it means. So if you could inform me, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, Nikki, do you want to pick up on that?
Yes, certainly. Thank you. Yeah, so just going back, so if we take Chepstow as a point in question, Chepstow at the start of the year was in a deficit, as was a number of other schools at that point in time. Chepstow were working through the deficit to make improvements and to see the school come back into a surplus. That recovery plan was put on hold for 12 months because of the pandemic and because of the fact that we couldn't do the restructure. So those costs have still been within that school budget. So although they have received balances and they have received the grants, had they have been able to continue on that recovery, then the balances would have been significantly higher. The same with all of our schools, where there was a deficit position at the start of the year and they had recovery plans in place, where they've been able to progress those recovery plans, then obviously those balances are reflective of those recovery plans. However, if they have had to delay the recovery plans, and had they been able to continue, then the balances would have been a lot higher. I think hopefully that's explained it a little bit clearer.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, but I think the other question is about the, presumably was the distribution of grants as a result of COVID, was it different according to the criteria? Because obviously the amount of surpluses in the different secondary schools seems to vary quite a bit considerably. Obviously, I mean, the figures are showing in red, but I mean, in our accounts, that means sort of positive and in credit. So I just wondered whether there was some sort of grant stipulations or something of that nature that meant that, particular schools did better than other schools in terms of what the availability of grants were.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brown.
Yeah, so, sorry.
Yeah, sorry,
sorry. So just to say that, yeah, that's exactly right. So, for example, the grants were given out by Welsh Government, and as I said at the start, the grants were prescribed by Welsh Government, the allocations of the grants. So the local authority had no hand in distributing those grants. They came in a prescribed format from Welsh Government. The bulk of it would have been done on the size of school. So obviously where you've got a school the size of Monmouth Comp, they would have received a significantly bigger amount of grants than somebody such as Chepstow, which is a smaller secondary school. Exactly the same across our primaries, where you've got the Dell compared to one of our very small Group 1 schools.
Okay, thanks. I think that explains that. Councillor Powell now then, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I know that this meeting is specifically about finance and money, but there is a problem which money can't solve, and I don't know whether it can solve it in a different way by paying for an extra post or what, but there's a lot of the children who, although they had their laptops provided by the schools and money that was collected, they didn't have any help at home, and probably they didn't even bother, and the parents aren't interested enough to get them down to doing the work. And there are a number of those that have slipped back and will always slip back. And I wonder if there is some way in which some of this money could be used to provide a post where they can specifically look after these children who have got behind, not because they didn't have a computer, but because they didn't have the backup of their parents.
Thanks, Maureen. I think that's an incredibly valid point. Nikki, do you want to say anything, or?
Yeah, happy to, Chair. Thank you. So yes, again, Councillor Powell, I do agree with that, and I know our schools were very proactive in providing laptops and digital solutions when schools were not having face-to-face teaching. However, as you pointed out, children do need the support of parents to be able to use those and to get on with their work where appropriate. The grants, yes, you're right. Yes, so the grants can be used to support those pupils, and all the schools are working now to identify where those gaps are and where best to, how best to recover from the pandemic and to put, raise standards within the schools. Those grant plans will be checked by the EAS and obviously our head of standards to ensure that they reflect what is the requirements of the school and the pupils in there. So yes, that's definitely the case.
Thank you. And I should declare an interest because I am a governor at King Henry VIII School.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Powell, and thanks, Nikki, for that answer. Any other questions or comments from the committee? No. Well, first and foremost, obviously thank Nikki Wellington from CYP Finance and Tyrone Stokes from Finance, particularly on social care. Sorry, Martin Crocott, you want to come back in? Yeah, come in, Martin. You're on mute.
Yeah, before we let Tyrone escape, I've got a comment on, he mentioned in paragraph 3.2 about the 1% being allowed in the budgets for salary increases, and that turned out to be inadequate. I'm just wondering if, looking forward to the next budget round, I would hope that our public service workers will be offered considerably in advance of 1%, considering what they've been through in maintaining services in the last year. Has any thought been given to what those post-pandemic pay awards in the public sector might look like?
Thanks, Councillor. And being a local authority employee, I can't really disagree with what you mentioned, but on a serious note, it is nice to have it reflected, the amount of work that's been done by local authority employees. In terms of the budget was agreed at 1% again, so there is a 1% allowance. That is still being negotiated with the local authority employers committee and various trade unions around the pay award. As soon as that gets announced, we'll be able to update Select and Council thereafter. Sorry, I can't be more specific than that, but it is due to the fact that it's still in those detailed negotiations. Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, well, no further comments. Thanks, Councillor Crocott, for that. Obviously, thank both the presenters this morning. Finance, I think, is always difficult, and it is probably more difficult now in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic. And obviously, we've had good points raised in terms of how that money will be used, particularly from CYP budgets. And certainly I feel strongly, and I know members of the committee feel strongly when we discussed it at the pre-meeting, that that money is put to good use. And certainly that's the point that Councillor Maureen Powell made about children who, yes, might have had the digital support, but obviously possibly lacked support at home or the capability to be able to help to homeschool. And some people are obviously in a stronger position to be able to do that. And I would certainly make a strong plea, and it must at the end be decided by schools, because they are in the front line. They know their pupils, they know what's happening in their areas. But I would make a very strong plea that surplus money and grant money is used in the most effective way to support children who have lost out and have possibly now, and I'm sure they have, slipped behind in terms of their performance. And certainly that is something that everybody would be looking for. I certainly appreciate the point that Nikki Wellington made, that obviously these figures now to a certain degree mask some of the deficits that are there. Everything looks very good, but obviously these sort of structural deficits are still there, and those obviously have to be tackled. And it's certainly quite a challenging situation. I'd add my thanks as well to the Welsh Government in terms of support during the COVID crisis in supporting schools so that they could operate safely and as far as they could effectively. I certainly have to declare an interest. I'm on the governing body, non-prejudicial for Ysgol Gymraeg Efenni, but thank you both this morning for that input. And we now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is agenda item 4, and that is performance monitoring. And I think, Will, are you going to lead on this?
Morning, Chair. I'll introduce
Emma,
it.
sorry, Emma, thank you.
I'll introduce it and then obviously open up to questions.
Yeah. And welcome to the committee, and you know, it's good to see you here this morning for the first time, so thanks for coming.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for having me. Good morning all. This report is to provide an annual update on progress made in 2020-21 on Corporate Plan Goal A, Best Possible Start in Life, to ensure members have an understanding of council performance and can scrutinise how well the authority has performed. As you'll be aware, the Corporate Plan is a 5-year programme that is aligned to a clear purpose of building sustainable and resilient communities. It identifies 5 priority goals, which also serve as the council's wellbeing objectives. Under each goal are a set of commitments to action, 22 in total across the whole plan, which the organisation is committed to delivering between now and 2022, so next year. The report, as you can see, has 2 appendices. The first one shows our performance management framework, which illustrates how all the various strands fit together in our performance reporting. As such, a lot of the information in the report will already be familiar to you, having been through the scrutiny process throughout the year. Appendix 2 provides a summary of activity and progress made in 2020-21 against the goal in the corporate plan that falls most closely under the remit of this committee, which, like I say, is Goal A. The past year has been an unprecedented one, and some of the aims within the plan have been paused or have progressed at a slower pace than intended. Each commitment has been allocated a progress rating, and an overall rating has also been provided for the goal itself. So for this goal, we've allocated a rating of 3, which is adequate. It's important at this stage to point out that these ratings relate to activity and progress against the actions, the commitments in the plan, but doesn't necessarily illustrate the significant activities undertaken during 2021 to support the pandemic response. So examples of some of the activity in the report include the advancements in digital and blended learning in our schools to ensure as many young people as possible could access learning during school closures. The innovative ways of ensuring support for those children, young people and their families who needed it, from family support meetings in outdoor settings, such as outdoor in the garden, to remote Friday friendlies, which were designed by the Monmouthshire Youth Council Engaged to Change to give young people the opportunity to talk, and the Shift Project, which supported 100 young people face-to-face and digitally who had poor mental health and well-being. And finally, the provision of outdoor open access play sessions during the Easter holidays for over 1,100 children and young people. Mon-Life activity hubs run at the 4 leisure centres during the summer holidays, which accommodated almost 4,200 children and young people. And also a summer play scheme provided at 3 sites across the county to provide additional support for children with disabilities. Now, ordinarily, the report would include performance information on a range of nationally set measures which are used by all councils in Wales. This would identify how Monmouthshire County Council's performance benchmarks with other councils in Wales. However, due to the impact of the pandemic, this information is limited for 2020-21, so does not provide adequate detail to support the analysis of performance. We have gathered this internally, however, where it is available, alongside our local performance measures, and this is presented in the report with additional information where necessary, where the figures don't align with the previous performance, to provide a better, a wider context and a better explanation. Finally, a report of progress against all 5 of the priority goals will be presented to Council in September, with a requirement for publication of the report by the end of October, as per the Local Government Wales measure. So that's it from me, Chair. Open it up to members for scrutiny of the report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Emma, and thanks for that. Any comments or questions from members? No problems with hand raising this morning, but does anybody want to come in on this? Councillor Grocott.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points really from the sort of action points that are listed there, and the first is a comment on the section on review of home to school transport. There is then a separate section on the development of safe routes to school. And it seems to me that these are both different elements of the same thing about how children get from home into school. And I think that going forward, it might make more sense to actually amalgamate those two sections, because clearly they are about the safety of young people in getting to school every day. So I'd value a comment on that, please. And the second, I don't know if this is more for Will than Emma, but the section there on review and develop leadership structures across schools. And the example that's given is the Federation of Cumin and Llandogo. But again, as we move forward, I think we need to look at that big amalgamation that's the potential in Abergavenny with the development of the all through school. So, for example, already a joint committee of governors has been established. And as we move forward, there will be a need to bring together the management structures, both senior leadership in the two schools and also the governing bodies of the two schools, if we're actually going to ensure that that amalgamation goes as well as it can, and ultimately for the huge benefit of the children of the schools concerned. So again, as we move forward, would it be possible to fold in comment about that into these monitoring reports? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Grocott. I don't know who wants to. Do you want to take the transport issue, Emma? Or
yes, certainly. Yeah, just a very quick point, really. This is a very good point raised by Councillor Grocott, and we're actually in the final year of the corporate plan as it stands currently. So we will be looking to review the actions going forward, and we'll certainly take that on board as a very good point as we consider this action in the new iteration of the plan.
Okay, thanks, Emma.
Thank you.
Will, do you want to come in on the second governing body issue, please?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Grocott, for the question. Yeah, I think that's a very fair point, actually. Obviously, this report is, as Emma's just said, reflecting back on the progress made to the 31st of March 2021. But I mean, for members of the committee as well, you know, the one we've drawn out there is Cumin and Llandogo, which is the executive headship between two of our primary schools, but obviously across the county as well in our secondary schools. Two of our secondary schools are part of broader partnership arrangements. So Caldicot is a partnership with Bishop of Llandaff in Cardiff, and in King Henry VIII, Elspeth Lewis provides executive headship leadership for Croeso Ceiliog. So it's actually, you know, that piece around how we develop our leaders and how we look at new structures is developing all the time. But Councillor Grocott is absolutely right, and in terms of how we reflect how well we do in the coming year, I think that will be an absolutely fundamental part of it in terms of bringing together both the governing bodies, but also the leadership of that potential new school. So yeah, happy to do that in the future.
Okay, thank you, Will McLean, for that. Any other questions or comments on the performance monitoring report, please? No. Oh, sorry, Councillor Brown.
Yeah, I think after that is Councillor Powell in the chat box. I just wanted to ask a question. It might be more of a question for Mon Life possibly, but it did in the report mention about money being spent to improve travel routes to school in Chepstow and Abergavenny, and I just wondered if you were able to give any more details of that, or if it's more a question of Mon Life, because I know it's only in the towns and it's not necessarily links from the villages to the towns. So if you could actually comment on that, or as I say, is it more of a question for Mon Life as to how these routes are being improved? Thank you.
I can offer a comment, Chair, if that's helpful. So
yes.
I know that money's been received in terms of Welsh Government in terms of promoting active travel, and that's critical for us, both in terms of there's a whole range of kind of policy drivers in terms of reducing carbon, promoting activity, and kind of creating safer routes, which we really want to see in terms of our children, young people, and how they access school. There is that focus in and around Chepstow and Abergavenny. Because of the nature of the county, there will always be a number of children, young people who do have to access school by bus and so on. But I know that the Mon Life team are busy working with our schools, and it was really good to see so much positive feedback from the way that they'd engage with children in school over the summer term to find out what our learners want in terms of how they access school and things which, scooting to school, all of those kind of things. It was great to see in the last few weeks of term children kind of learning to do that really safely. So cycle proficiencies, scooting safely, those kind of things. So I think there's a really positive move towards building that active travel offer. Hopefully with the Welsh Government capital, we'll be able to make best use of those routes and create really safe environments for the children to travel to school.
Okay, thank you, Will, for that. Councillor Maureen Powell, a hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know whether it would work here or not, but I know where my grandchildren went to school in Bromley, they used to have what they call walking buses, where a group of children from one particular area, and it meant that we didn't have all the parents having to go with them. They'd gather together and perhaps a couple of parents and walk them to school safely like that. Now, I don't know whether it would work here, whether our children are in enough of them in each area to do that. I was thinking more, I mean, the older ones in the secondary school age should be able to go by themselves anyway, but I'm thinking more of the slightly older ones in the primary schools who would be safe to walk to school, but with somebody there to monitor it. I don't know, it mightn't work here. I've never heard of it in Wales anywhere. I don't know if Will has.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Powell. Yeah, walking buses are great, and you do quite often see them, especially with littler children. Yes. And there's some nice little models, they kind of walk around, they have to hold the rope, all of them. There's one each side of the rope, and they all hold the rope as they walk through different places. So, yeah, they can be really helpful. And I think it's just about us creating a scheme which means that it's the obvious thing to do. Yes. I think that's the thing, that you create something whereby actually taking your car is more difficult. And actually in the Abergavenny area, there have been 2 really good trials since the pandemic, and driven, I guess, largely by people being concerned about social distancing and so on at the school gates. But if you went to Cantrev School in Abergavenny, you'll see that Harold Road is closed in the morning and in the afternoon, so there's no traffic outside the school. And the same in Goitra. And I'm really grateful to the work that colleagues in Highways Department did around that. And that's something which we'll look to roll out across the county now, because I think it has been a great success in those 2 schools, but we'll work with the schools to evaluate that properly before rolling it out.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, Councillor Power. Any other questions or comments? No. Well, obviously, I'd like to thank Emma Davis this morning for presenting the report. Thank you very much, Diolch yn fawr, and thank you to Will McLean again for coming in. Just the 2 main points about possibly tidying up things in terms of review of home to school transport and the safe routes to school. I think it's a valid point that should be taken on board. And then also the issue of the leadership structures and the governing bodies coming together for the current King Henry VIII and Derry View into the new school development in King Henry. That is important in terms of the success of that new school. So again, I think that's a very valid point. A point that I would make, having lived in the area a long time, taught at KHS, etc., and having had children in school there, it is this thing of trying to, I don't know if discourage is the correct word, but in reality, most children are capable of walking to school, particularly at secondary stage and in later junior stage. And my son certainly walked to school when he was in the junior phase in Key Stage 2. And in reality, I think as the new school develops, and in existing schools, we need to look more carefully at how we encourage children to walk to school, either with parents or with their peer group, so that there are less passenger cars going through schools. And schools and children and adults, pedestrians, it is quite a dangerous mix, isn't it? In terms of how many cars you have outside schools, and obviously King Henry will always have to have some bus transport, because you can't walk from Llantoni down to King Henry, and I would readily appreciate that. But I think so many children live probably less than a mile from the school, and then are transported. So I think that's something that we need to think about in the future. But once again, thanks for your input, Emma and Will. And that concludes agenda item 4. Remains now then only item 5, and that is to confirm the time and date of the next meeting, which is 9th of September at 10 o'clock, and that will probably be a slightly longer meeting. But thanks all for making the effort to attend this morning. We had to put in this extra meeting to look at these particular items, and I'm really grateful for that, and obviously wish you a pleasant summer, and that it's possibly not too hot, but thanks for your help and support today. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you,
Chair. Diolch.
Okay, diolch yn fawr. Thanks.